course, the trees are aware. Looking for the mother tree. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, or Searching for the Mother Tree. The argument that studies of what's especially going on underground indicate that in a healthy forest, you usually have the older trees that are basically actually helping to feed and guide the younger trees that are around through the root systems. There's actually communications and passing things on to the others and everything. It's absolutely amazing how they all help. So clearing a forest, clear cutting a forest, and then planting a few individual trees doesn't really bring back a healthy forest, because you need that kind of evolving interrelationship between the older trees and the younger trees that are wiped out by that kind of treatment. So there's in a way a consciousness associated with the trees and its awareness of its environment. And it's certainly something we can find out. A single-celled animal moves in the direction of the source of food, right? How does it decide? I'll go this way. It must have a sense apparatus, and even though it only is one cell, it obviously has some kind of intelligence so that it could live, right? So it's conscious in that sense, right? So we get all these different things that are conscious, and by the way, babies are conscious, and he talks about that in the book as we go through. So we end up discovering as he develops.
Wouldn't that necessarily lead, though, to sort of panpsychism?
There's a big concern. Remember, Spinoza is a heretic because he argues that God is the world, pantheism, right? And panpsychism would be, you can imagine, all of the world is a mind. And remember, Berkeley's argument was that actually that's the mind of God. Be careful, because if you go in too much in that direction, you're going to make God part of the universe, and that's heretical from the view that God was also the creator of the universe. God has to be, in some sense, outside of the creation, and yet clearly intelligent. And so what? Do we have communications with that? How so? Through the forces of the universe. Very complex. You just got to be careful that you don't get in trouble with the church if you're concerned about the index, which is the list of books that you're not allowed to read, which is a helpful way of finding out which books are the good ones. But so with Hegel, as he goes, let me notice it's a huge tome. I want to get to, but it's not moving very quickly, is it? Maybe I should have just went to the, did it have an index? Did you, or a, okay, so let's look, oh, no, back. I screwed up, but, okay, so, so consciousness. Once you get through the introduction, which, by the way, is also famous, but once you get through consciousness, notice how consciousness starts off with sense certainty, or the this and meaning, and so, of course, this is a reaction to Hume, the idea that we only have sense certainty, what we're aware of. And as children, that's certainly our first stage. We're as babies, the interaction you get with them, you know that they're learning, and what the meaning is of the experiences that they're having. And you do have to learn of different aspects of perception, whether or not things are as they were. A lot of the fun things to do with babies is play peekaboo, right? Right? That's, what? Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Right? You have to teach children that. and what does he mean by the super sensible world? Force and the understanding appearance and the super sensible world. Do you see that here? So super sensible is imagination, because that's not, of course, what you're actually perceiving in the sense that it's a live phenomena, but instead you're aware of having an imaginary experience of something. So in Hegel's view, this is experienced by a young person when they reach the terrible twos. And that's when your child, say, come here. No. Because they're imagining something that's not the case. And so this is kind of a fascinating little bit where we learn to say no. And that's just absolutely fascinating how he talks about that. And that introduces, for a lot of future philosophy, especially when we get to Jean-Paul Sartre, the ability to say no. Sartre's most famous book is L'être et le néant, which is to be being and nothingness, right? And where does nothingness come into the world? It comes in because of the human ability to say no. That's the negation, which Sartre says is the worm coiled in the heart of being. Sartre is fun. In any case, okay, so we pass this stage, and by the way, we would also today talk about the mirror effect. So how can you tell when something is self-aware or self-conscious, which is a higher level of consciousness, right? Because now not only are you conscious, aware of what's going on, but now you are also aware of yourself as a self, right? And where does that first seem to happen? Well, it's kind of fun. The mirror tells us when the child now knows that the reflection is itself. That's a certain point at which the child now knows that's me. And by the way, I think you need language for that. So the child usually at that point knows its name, etc., and has a sense that I'm a self, and that's my ear, and how did that dot get on my head? Where did that come from? Mommy put that there. I saw her do that. Why did she do that? Because now I look different, etc. But notice we're not the only ones that have self-consciousness. I noticed I had a parrot for a while. I loved the whole idea of, are parrots mimicking us or are they speaking? And so I was able to I wanted a African gray. I thought that would be, the way to really get into that. But my wife, knowing how expensive those were and reading the paper, noticed that there was one where all you had to do was pay for the cage. And it was a monk parrot or a Quaker parrot, right? And she said, and it was local too, just in Eagle River. She said, Bill, get this one. You just have to pay $250 and you got the cage, and they give you the bird for free. And so I went to the house after calling them and arrived and came in, and they introduced me to the bird, which promptly flew over, sat on my neck, and bit me in the neck. It hurt like hell. But I thought, it's a test. So I just looked at the bird and I said, ow, that's mean. I forget what I said to it, but I was calm and I didn't get mad at it. And the bird looked at me and said, we're in. And it was a test. And the bird actually, I passed the test, and the bird adopted me, basically. For just the price of the cage, I brought it home, and it bit everybody else. But they reacted poorly, and as a result, I was the only one that had glommed onto it. And so for a couple of years, I had this pico, and we never figured out whether it was male or female. But in any case, I was its mate as far as it was concerned, and it didn't like anybody else near me, and so on. But it knew hundreds of words already, plus other expressions besides. I mean, as I was walking along, I was wheezing. And I thought, wait a minute, I don't wheeze. the bird was wheezing while I was walking along. And where did it get that? Well, remember, it was a used bird. And it already had the vocabulary. So the previous owner obviously was already old enough and had died. And I now was the owner of this bird that was used to walking with an old man that was wheezing while he was walking. So it wheezed for me. And we had all kinds of interesting things. And I was convinced that this bird is self-conscious. And notice when it's in the cage, in the mirror, a parakeet will make a mess of the mirror. You have to clean the mirror every week in a parakeet cage because the parakeet keeps trying to feed the friend that's in the mirror. And so it keeps slobbering chewed up seeds and stuff for the bird, trying to help it along. Parrots don't do that. They know that that's me in the mirror, and they don't try to feed the bird because they know it's me. So I would argue that at least birds do. We know that dolphins have a self-consciousness. They have names, right? And we've got people that study them, etc. Alistair McIntyre, his daughter works with dolphins, and I think I mentioned that Alistair, in working with his daughter, working with the dolphins, then wrote the book about dependent social animals. That was the name of that book. So I think that was pretty much the last one he wrote. I'm not sure. But in any case, so we know other mammals clearly have language, etc., and are social. Right? So we're not the only ones that are self-conscious. But what's interesting about self-consciousness in this section here, and this is where you end up with lordship and bondage, which in other translations might be master-servant, master-slave, depends, right? What happens here? And the neat thing about this book that's different than all the previous philosophers is that Hegel's not describing the way things are. It's kind of like a novel where he's giving you a blow-by-blow description of what's going on, right? And so when you're looking at that section, and it starts on page I think 111 was what I suggested, right?
We're way past 111.
Well, I was being... close. So, this is the section. And let me try to explain as it goes, right? Self-consciousness exists in and for itself when and by the fact that it so exists for another. That's what Ellie was talking about, right? To have self-consciousness, it has to be social, right? So I have to have a relationship with an other. The French call it the look, le regard, right? That I have to have that interaction with someone else in order for me to be self-aware. The notion of this, its unity in its duplication, embraces many and varied meanings. So what are those? So even though I have to have a subjective side of me, which is in itself, right? I'm also aware of me for myself. So there's an in and for itself, right? And what am I thinking of as me? Well, all the characteristics I think of as me. Notice they're in language, right? But I'm thinking of myself. Bill Jamison, 206-428-256, married 51 years, right? Ongoing process. Father, retired military, pretend school teacher, all these different conceptual things I think of as me, and I hold those in my mind as what I am. But that's actually not what I am. I am the subject that's having this experience. Remember Hume, I'm having all this phenomena, experiencing, and one of the phenomena I'm experiencing is my believing all of these conceptual things that I think of as me, right? So there's the self that's having the experience, the in itself, and the for itself, how I appear to myself, the for itself, right? Now, this can be multiple kinds of relationships. So I clearly have a self-consciousness for myself. So I have these conceptions of me. And probably it started at least by the time I was 2, right? As I'm developing this concept of me. This is my hand, this is my bottle, etc. Which is